From Bitcoin, blockchain or distributed ledger technology to cryptocurrencies, tokens and initial coin offerings, it seems everyone involved has something to say, but can you really trust their advice? One man's had enough of weasel words and charlatans and is ready to give you impartial, independent analysis. With digestible blockchain bites, ICO analysis and need-to-know news on cryptocurrencies, author, speaker, transparency and clarity advocate and award-winning software innovator Barry James brings you Radio ICO.
Hello, it's Barry James again for ICO Radio and the Blockchain Bites program and AI and blockchain. Two hugely innovative areas, and I've got one of the pioneers from the AI side of that with me today. So I'd like to welcome Tania Peitzker. Is that reasonably close to the right pronunciation, Tania?
Not quite, Peitzker.
Peitzker, I beg your pardon. Would you like to introduce yourself and Bots as a Service? Which is an intriguing start already. And tell us a little bit about, first of all, your background, how you got into AI, and then we'll come on to Bots as a Service a little bit. But mostly we want to talk about how this all relates to blockchain and vice versa. So starting with a bit of background, please.
Sure. Well, I got involved with originally with a chatbot company nearly 10 years ago in end of 2008, just before the financial crisis. And I was hired by these two brothers in Devon to be their capital raiser finder for capital. And that was a chatbot company doing natural language processing. And the long and the short of it is I ended up becoming a shareholder after getting them an offer of $5 million, which they turned down, silly of them. And then we kept developing, working on the R&D aspect, and the NLP, the natural language processing of our proprietary algorithm, evolved into more and more AI and machine learning as the whole field went that direction. So that's how I got involved in this space.
So give us a feel for what Bots as a Service is and where you are now. I mean, how clever is this stuff?
Well, it's not the science fiction level of your general listener would think the robots are coming for us, Terminator, or the gloom and doom debate that keeps surfacing, especially hyped up through the media. A lot of the tech giants are to blame as well by over-promising on what a certain device can deliver. It's not as smart, the phone and the virtual assistant. They're now called IVAs, intelligent virtual assistants. So IVAs is the new term for chatbots with more and more AI increased learning. And it's incremental. Even the robot manufacturers, the robotics, the chatbots, now AI bots, we call ourselves AI bots to distinguish ourselves in the midst of all this jargon and terminology. Cognitive interfaces is sort of where it's at and where we're at. So what we're doing, again, to unfortunately rely on jargon, is we're doing mixed reality. It's also called immersive reality, where we're taking what began as a chatbot project, pure and simple, online in a extreme sports community platform where the chatbots were engaging humans and increasing the membership all on their own as autonomous entities, to populate the site literally with humans. We've gone from there to cognitive interfaces, which is what we're talking about. People would be familiar with Amazon Alexa probably as a 3D device in your home. It's also called a home environment. Cognitive interfaces basically means you can talk to your device. So whether you're talking to your PC, talking to your phone or tablet, that is now a cognitive interface. And that's where all the billions and billions and billions are going from Google, Amazon, Apple, IBM, of course, with Watson. All the tech giants are putting billions, Facebook, into cognitive interfaces.
And just to get a feel for this, can any of this stuff passed the Turing test yet. So just for anyone who's not heard of, I'm sure I know you have, but for anyone who's not heard of the Turing test, it's basically if you can't see who you're interacting with, can you tell whether a machine passes the Turing test if it passes as a human? So are we close to that?
Yeah, we've already reached that over and over.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting thing. I think that's what keeps us all going as bot developers, because within the industry we see these repeat successes over and over, and it doesn't take billions, it takes talent. So that's why you're seeing startups and new ventures like ours. Even though we've got a 10-year-old algorithm, people might think, wow, that's a long R&D phase. Well, you've got to compare that to IBM Watson and Microsoft's bot network being developed over 30 years, or Nuance Communications through Ray Kurzweil, who's now the head of AI at Google. He spent 40 years of his life on exactly what we're doing. So it's talent combined with money in the end. But yes, I describe it best when I give conference talks as flashes of AI, or flashes of passing the benchmark of the Turing test. So what we're all aiming for is that a human, one of us, will talk to a machine. That's why it's often termed human-machine interaction is the other jargon for it. Human-machine interaction. Within 3 minutes that the machine can engage you, whether it's pretending to be a human or just being honest and saying, I'm a chatbot, I'm a bot, I'm a machine, but it's getting you on an emotional level. And that's the benchmark we've all been striving for, is that whatever it takes for the human to be retained for those 3 minutes and beyond, and persuade them to a certain action. So that is the real commercialized goal of the Turing test. And that's definitely being passed over and over, not just by us, but by obviously these companies throwing billions at it. They wouldn't keep throwing more billions every year unless they were getting those sort of successes. Okay.
And again, just to kind of set the scene slightly, what would you say is kind of we've heard about Watson and, winning quiz shows and all of that stuff. What would you say is the high watermark, in terms of the state of the art at the moment?
It's combining the cognitive abilities where they are right now. So they are still rudimentary. So cognitive can also mean, Google and Apple and so on, and Uber and Tesla, their facial recognition, or it's called Google DeepMind is the classic one. Google DeepMind, which is headquartered in London, are recognizing patterns or images. So they're still at the cat stage, as everyone famously knows. That's the best you can hope for, as a machine identifies cats and then goes on to humans. But in China, we're seeing already the rollout of very sophisticated human-machine deep learning pattern recognition software used for surveillance purposes, where they then can identify, they say, people exactly to identify them correctly, that's who that person is. So that's a form of AI, cognitive interfaces. And to combine that then with a thinking machine, that's what the holy grail is, that we can combine, say, I was looking at Microsoft bot networks, as they're calling it. They've rebranded it Azure, and they're trying to get developers in like us. The last few years, they've raised the numbers of developers on that platform to 300,000, they say. And you can think this crowdsourcing of all this talent that they're offering plugins so that independent developers and startups and ventures like ours can then grab speech recognition, grab the facial recognition, use part of their network. If people haven't got their own natural language processing source code like we do, if they don't have that resource that we've invested in privately, then they can borrow from Microsoft also for a fee. Mm-hmm. So the stage is still rudimentary, but what they're doing as a strategy is to throw everything at it, money, and then opening up APIs to bring in crowdsourced talent, so that everywhere in the world at any time, 24 hours a day, you've got people working on this problem of how to increase and heighten the performance of cognitive interfaces.
So it's all moving pretty fast.
Yeah, it's AI, as Ray Kurzweil, who's sort of the father figure, I guess, or is self-styled the father figure of artificial intelligence. He calls it the singularity, that everything's accelerating to this point. So AI has become almost meaningless as a term, artificial intelligence, because it can mean everything from drones to robots to chatbots. But cognitive interfaces is a useful term that's gaining currency.
Okay. So just to play devil's advocate slightly for a moment. So we've got blockchain over here, which is kind of racing away on its own, sort of diverging rail network. We've got AI over here. They've got nothing to do with one another, really, have they?
It's surprising, isn't it? I mean, we've been keeping an eye on the blockchain space purely and simply because we keep being approached by specialists wanting us to do an ICO and suggesting some really clever, fascinating ways we can turn what our service is, bots as a service, into a cryptocurrency and do an ICO. It's very tempting. And we've actually just put it into our business plan and strategy for the long term to consider an ICO in 2020. But I just assumed, given that these service providers of ICOs from Dubai to Switzerland to Gibraltar through Singapore, US, we've received advice, France, Monaco. I mean, it's coming from all directions. ICO specialists advising us we should put forward our company as a cryptocurrency and raise capital that way instead of crowdfunding or instead of a Series A. So I just assumed there was a lot more happening with a convergence of AI and blockchain. And as it turns out, the very first conference addressing that just happened last month in New York, I think it was, called Brains and Chains. So brains for the AI and chains for the blockchain. Yeah. So doesn't it seem to have been that well, sort of, it's been developing in parallel from what I can see.
But you've got a bit of a vision for this, haven't you? I've been slightly mendacious. So how do you see, or both you and what's coming out of that conference? Where are the first touch points?
Well, I read an interesting summary of that from one of the speakers at the Brains and Chains conference, a guy called Matt Turk. I've forgotten the name of his company, but if you Google Brains and Chains, AI and blockchain, I think is the title of his summary and his presentation. And Matt says that there is a type of divergent philosophy, or a lot of people from Peter Thiel and other big entrepreneurs are saying that blockchain is fundamentally a different system or philosophy to AI. And I'd never thought of it. Sorry, AI is a different system to blockchain. And I think, yeah, maybe that's true. I don't know enough about blockchain. I see it as a passive vehicle, whereas AI is a very dynamic tool that could be integrated quite easily into blockchain. So that's where I think it will happen, is we've been asked to put chatbots on blockchain just recently from Sydney and Singapore. And even further, one step further, the suggestion was we turn every chatbot conversation into a form of measurement of our own crypto token, because every character that's typed or spoken and converted into a character could count as a measure quantifying the currency, which is fascinating, and it's something we're going to look into.
Yeah, I saw some of that debate about, the different philosophical basis being imputed, and to be fair, I think in the case of blockchain, there's clearly is a philosophical basis. It clearly comes from a pressing need and desire to decentralize, and from people who see that as, if not destiny, at least the future of the human race. But there's, in that stuff I saw, it was imputing to AI almost the opposite philosophy, the centralized philosophy, the closed versus the open, the controlling. Is that fair?
I think that's a simplified characterization of both very complex forms of technology. And I'll tell you why, because I've been involved with artificial intelligence in the form of natural language processing and to some extent machine learning. And then writing books now. I've been commissioned to write a book on this field and lecturing at Schema in France. So I'm getting more and more involved in the history of it. And the history of artificial intelligence has always been decentralized, apart from when you had NASA and the American military, and as they still do, NASA and their offshoot Singularity University, pushing and really heavily developing and investing in artificial intelligence. But since the 1980s around the world, you've seen a lot of independent entrepreneurs and scientists coming out of universities, and it's all been quite decentralized. So it's a characterization that doesn't quite fit, because there's certainly no unified AI, and I don't think there ever will be. Like you see with the American launch of the internet, that's not comparable. I don't think there's going to be a NASA launch of an overarching AI. And if there were, I think you'd then immediately see the Chinese come back with, or have already in the wings, their own advanced forms and platforms. And then from Australia to Singapore to Africa, wherever, it's pretty much in as a development being decentralized. But at the same time, you've got blockchain happening. I think that's what concerns a lot of people in the shadows, that it's got this contrary or contradicting claim of being for transparency, which is the anarchic libertarian it's been characterized as, call for transparency, open everything up, get rid of the middleman in financial services and banking. But at the same time, people aren't taking it up because it's not transparent and it's obscure, hard to understand, and people think it's hidden. So I think there's a lot of image problems for both forms of tech, but they're highly compatible at the same time.
I think you're right about, and I think you use exactly the right words in terms of what you've just described with blockchain and the image problem, because as you probably know, I'm sure you do, it was designed specifically to be able to take out the middlemen, specifically central banks in the first instance, and institutions more generally, and be, as a system to create peer-to-peer trust. Now, obviously, it doesn't take very much. You don't have to listen to Jamie Dimon, for example, banker in chief, for very long to realise that they might not like that idea. And there's certainly been a meme that he's helped perpetuate, and has come, from that corner, shall we say, which is very much about trying to identify, and this happens with a lot of technology. It happened with the internet generally, didn't it? To identify, in this case, blockchain technology with the dark web, which doesn't really stand up. It's any tool can be abused.
The remarkable thing, I taught this as case studies and a subject in my business school for Masters of Science students at Schema, and we looked at some specific case studies that contradict all the bad image side of blockchain and crypto, in that Japan is the leading light in totally advancing cryptocurrencies from a government backing point of view. I mean, not point of view, they're actually implementing it. So the Japanese are quite happy to use any form of digital wallet. And even when one crashed, actually while I was teaching this last semester, my students said, oh, well, what about the big crash? I said, yes, but everyone got paid out. So obviously the Japanese infrastructure and banking infrastructure has thought of that and insured the companies, or given that company some form of insurance, or they had reserves, but there wasn't a crisis. It was averted in that people who had their funds stolen from the digital wallet got them back. You've then got Singapore, again, shifting its infrastructure. Dubai, the people who contacted me were from the Dubai government about doing an ICO. So they've got government backing, financial services, banks in Dubai backing this change. And now your last interviewee was from Switzerland, PricewaterhouseCoopers. They don't dabble in things at random. They've obviously investigated this over years and now publicly taking a stand that this is the way Switzerland's going. So PwC's involved. And I know we looked at relocating to Switzerland because of these changes happening at the fundamental level. And even I used to live in Lucerne for a couple of years, and even the local bakery has its own cryptocurrency. They brought it out just for Easter, a coin with the Easter rabbit. So that's how flexible and mainstream it's gone there. It's quite stunning.
Yeah.
NASDAQ's gone and experimented with blockchain.
Yeah. In fact, you'll be reading a story, or at least our listeners will by the time, hopefully by the time this goes out, that I wrote, will go out next week, pulling the threads together. But basically, it's now confirmed that the owners of the New York Stock Exchange, who are called ICE, Intercontinental Exchanges, have got together with Microsoft and with Starbucks. What a combination! With the express intention of making Bitcoin in particular and cryptocurrencies in general mainstream. And they're collaborating and investing in this. What stronger signal could we want that this is going to be mainstream?
I was working with a Florida investor 2 years ago, doing some work for him in Europe, and he was the one who kept talking about blockchain and NASDAQ and ICOs basically replacing IPOs for ventures. And it makes sense. There's a logic to it, rather than the expense and the near impossibility if you're a 5-year-old venture, 10-year-old tech venture, and you're already feeling ancient, to then gather the resources to go and do a public floating of your company. It's just beyond most tech ventures' scope. Whereas an ICO it's logically achievable and building on communities that you've already built for selling your products and services. The other case study, I think, where we could see bots and AI integrating is what Rotterdam, the port of Rotterdam's done, is they've shifted the port of Rotterdam, which I think is the largest in Europe, to blockchain. So they've forced all their users, which are mostly SMEs, bringing in freight on big ships, but they're still SME companies. They say, well, we're going to invoice you on blockchain. You've got to pay us through blockchain, like it or not. So you can see something as crucial as an old traditional port and the busiest, biggest, highest volume port in Europe, just like it or not, they've gone switched to blockchain, and all the SMEs have to, adapt and adopt the tech. And if you had a chatbot using AI on top of that, which will be that they're doing a lot of R&D in Rotterdam, because we went in depth for my business students, which is one of the reasons I do a couple of days a week at the business school, because it keeps you up to speed. And you could easily integrate in where you've got this really strong case study and use case where a whole port, an international port, has forced everybody to go onto blockchain and invoice and pay through blockchain and currencies, then digital currencies. Then you can easily add on another layer of AI in whatever form it is: deep mining, data mining, smart bot, IVA, chatbot, cognitive interface. It's easy to do a mixed reality installation at the port where you've got, a chatbot or a bot or a robot talking to you, helping you through all the paperwork, which is now digital. Yeah,
I think you might be having the phone ringing on that one shortly. But let me just take you back one step, because you said we happened across an interesting opportunity there. I think we're going to need an IPO bot. In fact, we're going to need a small army of IPO bots that understand the rules in the different territories. And can you sort this out, please?
Yeah, there's thousands of use cases. They're all waiting to happen. And the market research shows that this will happen. I was just interviewed by Markets and Markets in India, a famous business intelligence firm. They sell their reports at $8,000. They interviewed me a year ago for their 5-year report on chatbots and IVAs. And then they got back to me this year and said, actually, we're doing a new report on cognitive interfaces and artificial intelligence. So an hour recorded plus surveys. And they came out with their report this week saying that our market is going to be worth over $1.8 trillion by 2023. Wow. So they were looking in around the 15 billion mark a few years ago, last time they did their intensive market research. So they went and interviewed all the FANG lot and the US tech giants, Samsung, the Asian tech giants, and then they select a few of us who are up and coming. And that's what their market intelligence has shown, and they've not the first cognitive interfaces report they've done. So, and that's superseded what IVAs and chatbots can do. So we're in the right space with cognitive interfaces. I think they do blockchain as well, Barry's.
Yeah. But, you know, joking apart, that is that sort of thing is it on the interface between the two. And I mean, just to take a different lens here, you know, rather than a philosophical one. One of the, as you know, I've been involved in software since I started punching tapes a very, very, very long time ago. Makes me sound older than I am, because I was a boy, and the machine was obsolete. I'm explaining like I do, but it's a long time, and software was thought of very differently in those days to the way it is now. In fact, they genuinely thought when I started my career that, you know, a piece of software would, you know, be written once and just reused all the time, the perfect sort, the perfect this, the perfect that. We've come a very long way since then. One of the things I've given a lot of thought to over the last few years is, you know, why the internet is so different. You know, in terms of, you know, a set of tools, you know, why is that so different? And the conclusion that I've reached with the internet is it's not a tool, it's an environment. And it seems to me that this is an interesting lens here. So, you know, with blockchain, it's another environment. It's taking that whole environment to the next level. Whereas, and this is where I'd be really interested in your thoughts, because it may, you know, be helpful in terms of understanding the interface between the two. I think bots are actors in that environment in a new sort of way. So they're agents, aren't they, rather than, you know, software or an environment, you know, in ways that we've looked at before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one, they could populate a blockchain platform to make it more user-friendly. So where you've already got an instance, say with the Rotterdam port example, that they're using it for payment systems, or any number of use cases in Japan that are consumer-facing. Sure, an IVA, a bot, can help on a blockchain platform as a onboarding process and FAQ, frequently asked questions, facts. But the other part of AI is sorry about the phone. The other part of AI is the deep learning, and that's what's generally considered the intelligent part of it, is that where you've got programs interfacing, say, with the blockchain, you know, algorithm, that it could go in and keep learning. That's the machine learning. It's not magic. It's simply they're looking at, okay, what's been done on this platform already? What are the patterns, or, you know, what are the contingencies, and it learns from that. And that's the essence of artificial intelligence. It sounds all fancy and Terminator, they're coming to kill us, but at the end of the day, it's nothing as fantastic as that. It's simply getting a program, as you said, writing software, but you're taking the manual element out. You instigate it as a human, and then the machine takes over and learns on its own. And then we go off into the philosophical, you know, scenarios of what happens when it becomes self-conscious and learns too much and gets out of control, which is actually where the Matt Turk article ended up with the brains in chains. I think the guys in New York got a bit overexcited.
Yeah, I think so.
The platforms might get out of control, but that's far from, you know, that's a long way off from happening ever. Well,
Elon Musk's very exercised about this, isn't he?
A lot of them, they've even written letters, public letters, and saying, you know, it shouldn't be militarized because it could get out of control. And then what if AI was so well integrated into a blockchain platform, we lost control of the blockchain platform. So I don't see that as possible, because sure, if an algorithm keeps learning and improving on itself, it's easy enough to program in, fault lines and barriers to stop it. nothing's going to be that smart. I mean, it might take 10 or 20 years to get something that's going to be so organic that it just goes off and keeps running. But it's a fantasy that people love to get very worried about now when it's still in the fantasy stage and not likely to happen for decades.
Just on that front, in terms of AI, where are we in terms of creativity? I mean, true creativity in AI world.
You've already got AI algorithms, to sort of use a catchphrase, that can create music, that can paint. There's several developers who show the paintings very proudly, like parents, of what their code has painted or created. The whole Go and Jeopardy game playing of Google DeepMind, or what used to be DeepMind Technologies before it was bought by Google, and then Watson winning Jeopardy, that's a form of creativity in that it learnt how to play a game, So as much as it's rules based, it's still having an element. And Go, the whole Go, if you're interested in that, Go is considered by the Chinese and the people who've played it as harder than chess, because you need a certain level of creativity and contingency reaction rather than planning and rules-based order.
So this isn't, in your view, just internalizing and following and evolving rules?
Yeah, it's being clever to the point of, in the Go instance, and this is why Google paid $400 million for the algorithm, that by winning Go, it demonstrated a level of creativity that hadn't been recorded before. That is in artificial intelligence algorithm. Not to say that after they put in 400 mil, it's still pretty much under wraps. You don't hear much about them, what they're doing, except that they're using their diagnostics for NHS patient data, which is, to be fair, what IBM Watson has been doing for several years now. So that in itself is an innovative. So it hasn't made any remarkable leap since it got 400 mil acquisition funding, which just shows you it can be it's like the equivalent of the 3-minute flash of natural language processing, where you really think you're talking to a human and it's actually a chatbot. Yeah.
So we're going to need to wrap up in a minute or two, and I'd like to just scan the horizon as to where you think this is going. But one thought or suggestion, I think it was yours actually, that I heard when we were preparing for this interview, was the idea that hacking's a big problem. That the blockchain technology itself is famously secure, but the interfaces have been hacked many a time. Bots defending the blockchain.
Yeah, that's my take on it, because after reading the outcomes of this Brains and Chains conference in the US and Matt Turk's summary of it, they saw AI as an opposing system because it needed to be a black box, which means, for those who don't know, that you can't look into the algorithm and see what's under the hood like a car. And it is made deliberately a secret, because if you show too many people, you can get hacked and copied, and you lose your intellectual property. Just like our company, our intellectual property is our source code. So no, we don't go around showing it. No, we don't get a patent on it. No, we don't want to reveal it. It's a security measure. So necessary these days, as well as protecting your intellectual property. Now, I don't know what the IP situation is for blockchain operators, whether they're precious about their algorithm being revealed or whether they just show the user interface part of the blockchain. But the combining of those, whereas they're saying that the blockchain needs to be a white box because that's its whole motivating principle and mission in life is to be transparent. You still have a cybersecurity issue, as we saw with that Japanese hack attack and people losing their money and their crypto coins through the digital wallet being hacked. So yes, we have been looking at developing a bot that patrols platforms, whether it's a back-end CMS or a back-end corporate system, and booby trapping against hackers. We've been working and beta testing that, which could be applied to a blockchain platform where if you have bad actors, as in real life, they get called out and they get trapped by the chatbot or by the bot being a convincing human, which they're actually not. They're actually testing and patrolling for bad actors.
Yeah, I can see the use of that. I mean, blockchain, by the way, is built on open source, so that's part of its strength. So all the software involved in the platforms, there are exceptions, but these are proprietary and different from the core, and tend to be a fork from the open source stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that. So what's the percentage of proprietary to open source in blockchain development?
In the open blockchain stuff, 100%.
All right. Okay, that's
100%.
Excuse my ignorance. See, so it just shows you we are in different worlds.
And where the hacks tend to happen, almost always is in the interfaces. So in the exchanges and places like that, where actually they're kind of interfacing into some other technology, where there's, as you say, user interfaces and accounts and so on. Not to say that isn't a big problem. It is.
Yeah. Okay. So where you get the commercial transactions, I expect, because that's where they get their loot, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, if we were to behave securely and transfer Bitcoin or ETH between my wallet and yours, you can pretty much guarantee that that's pretty, virtually unhackable. But if you've got an exchange in the way, obviously there's a target there. There's, and if they don't get it right, it's hackable. So, there's a role there. But moving towards the end of the interview, because we're going to run out of time, and I really want to hear what you're going to say. Scanning the horizon, where do you see this going? What could be the potential of the intersection of these two amazing technologies?
I think it's inevitable. Brains and chains will merge. That's why the conference was obviously called by some of their tech leaders in the US, being forerunners as usual. They're always a few years ahead of us in Europe, as I'm told by my American friends. And they've, although I would disagree in this case, because I've seen these sort of initiatives happening in Berlin. Berlin happens to be a huge center for blockchain early stage development. And they've probably thought, some startups in Berlin have probably thought about, and Switzerland, I would say, combining AI and deep learning and bots onto a blockchain platform, because they're trying to find use cases. So the more and more use cases you get for a blockchain platform, the more there will be an adding on of AI and what it can do in its various forms.
Yeah, cool. So if there's one thing that you would hope listeners would take away from this conversation about AI or blockchain, or the combination of the two, what would it be? Support
it, buy from it, be willing to adopt, because if we don't, we just keep being, if you're in Europe anyway, there's going to be less and less diversity, and more things will come from the US and China and just a few other places, whereas everything needs an ecosystem with diversity, every form of tech, whether it's climate change, tech, green tech, or blockchain use cases. And I think the Rotterdam example is just as good as anything happening in Japan or New York and San Francisco. What's happening in Switzerland is noteworthy and should be understood and known in other parts of the world, but it won't if people listening and people just doing their everyday job don't adopt and understand it and evangelize it a bit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I'd second that it's citizens' prerogative, but also duty, I think, in this area to participate, to understand there's so many decisions that are going to be coming down the track, I believe, that are going to affect all our future, the future of society and civilization. I couldn't agree more that we should all be out there participating.
Yeah, e-government in Estonia is my final word. I'm not sure to what extent Estonians are using the blockchain, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a lot, because they're absolute world leaders in e-government.
Did you say robot chain?
No, blockchain.
No, but I liked it when I thought you said robot chain.
That's my Aussie accent.
We'll talk about that later. I don't know whether you're going to get the domain for that or someone else already got it, or I am, but we'll see.
Services in Estonia, they're my heroes.
Yeah, great stuff. All right, well, fascinating to talk, Tania. Thank you so much. I know we're going to be in touch, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting this area together in this format in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.
ICO Radio was brought to you by author, speaker, transparency and clarity advocate, and award-winning software innovator Barry James. Get in touch with the programme, put yourself or someone else forward as a guest. Visit iconewsdesk.com. And if you've enjoyed the show, please leave a review. And don't forget to subscribe to get your next insights and interviews from the ICO Radio podcast.